Hey everybody, welcome to Latter-day Struggles. This is Valerie here on my own, and I am actually here today to record an episode that was not expected, but I have a little bit of a funny story. So from time to time, I get invited to be a guest on other people's podcasts, which I just could not enjoy more. And the reason why is because following in a discussion is so different and so much more enjoyable than leading a discussion. There's just like no stress on you. You're like, whatever, I'm just going to respond to what they say, as opposed to sort of, being in charge of the arc of the conversation and the time and all these things. I just don't have to worry about it. So anyways, I was with the gentleman over at Pioneer Paradox. Casey McFarland for sure. And I just got to meet his co-host today, and I'm embarrassed to say I do remember his first name was Will. I don't even know if I ever heard his last name. So anyways, Will and Casey over at Pioneer Paradox asked me to come onto their show and sort of dig deep into this concept of the myth of normal. It, I guess, came from a book club that they run, a men's book club, and they read The Myth of Normal by Gabor Maté. And what they wanted to talk about is some things in Latter-day Saint theology and culture and practice that may feel normal and aren't. And so this won't surprise you, but I sunk into a little bit of a study rabbit hole, and I just really got into it. By the end of the preparation period for myself, I very well could have hijacked the entire podcast, but you're going to be very grateful to know that I didn't. That's why I'm here today. So my hope is, if all the stars align, I will be running this podcast either right before or right after you hear the podcast where I am a guest on their show, because what we do talk about, it was a wonderful experience, as it always is. I really love just getting to talk to people. So, but we talked about the normalization of sort of having a suspicion of finding God in nature. And this may be more harkening back to early stage faith, right? That like there was, and sometimes still there's some narrative around like, no, you really need to be in the church building to find God, right? The normalization of ostracizing people who end up moving in different directions on their faith journey, the normalization of authority figures determining and dictating what is spiritual or what questions we're even allowed to ask, and the normalization of allowing the church to determine what spiritually resonates with us. And so we had a really fun time talking about those. So I hope you stick around and, well, either maybe you've already listened to it over there, or maybe you'll hear it over here. But what I want to do today is, you know how I like to nerd out, and I just really want to spend some time visiting with you all about this concept of normal. But on my little study rabbit trail, I started asking myself some questions that are very fundamental to this larger question about normal. And what it brought me to was a study of the difference between the words normal and how is this different or similar to the word normative? And boy, this just took me down like the most fascinating rabbit trail that I did not have time for. It's, as an aside, as I digress, if I didn't get on these sort of academic study nerd rabbit trails, I wonder how much I would get done in other ways of my life. It is something to ponder. But then I wouldn't be able to create such like fun content like this. So anyways, here we go. So normal is more of it's like descriptive and context bound. And what I mean by that is, just to define the concept of normal for our purposes today, normal refers to what is common or socially expected within a specific group, culture, or institution at a given time. So it's what happens all of the time. And this is not laden with value. It's just what is common. So think about it like this. It's what a community or a system or a family or whatever says, like it's what they determine inside of themselves, and it's sort of maintained by social reinforcement. It's like, this is what we do around here. Oftentimes, we as human beings become very good at mapping the room and saying, okay, what do they do here? What's normal here? And what do I need to do to belong or to be approved of or even to gain some status? And then we adopt that version of normal to be able to sort of fit in. What's normal also, fascinatingly, can shift with leadership, or it can shift with policy changes. If you think about government or church policy changes. So in other words, it's really malleable and it changes a lot. It's really something that sometimes is so prevalent, but also very, very invisible. Another way to think about normal is, what do people like us usually do? This us can be Americans, it can be Latter-day Saints, it can be faith journeying Latter-day Saints, it can be Republicans or Democrats or fans of a certain football team. Like, what do we do? Okay. This is important. This distinction is important because normal doesn't mean healthy, right? Something can be normal and still be very harmful. It can be immature, it can be unethical, and it can actually be psychologically destabilizing. So just because it's common or normal doesn't mean it's good. Now, it also doesn't mean it's bad, okay? It could go either direction. All right, let's spend a second talking about the concept of normative, okay? And this matters because you'll see why it matters. Okay, so normative is actually, it's not as much about a description of what is, but it's more about a developmental standard, or said a different way, normative refers to what is developmentally appropriate or psychologically healthy or conducive to human flourishing. So I'm talking about normative in the context of human growth and development. And one determines what is normative based on research and observation of like a cross-cultural or a clinical population. In other words, you can look and see what is normative for a cohort of people that leads them to, let me say that differently. One can decide or determine what is normative or developmentally appropriate by looking at a large group of people and saying, this is typically what happens, or these developmental steps unfold in this way that bring about the best type of well-being. Okay, so some key characteristics of the concept of normativity is it's grounded in developmental psychology, neuroscience, psychiatry, spiritual formation. And so in some ways, it's almost like a social science kind of thing. It's evaluated by looking at people across time, cultures, life stages, and its normativity is oriented towards what is helpful, what helps people thrive. And it's more concerned about well-being outcomes and not conformity. And so hopefully you're starting to pick up on the difference between something that's normal or common may or may not be conducive to the well-being of the people in that society or that culture that are doing these supposedly normal things, right? So it's a whole different thing, although the words sound almost the same, unfortunately, which was why I think it gets a little bit confusing. Okay, so if you were to say with normalness, right? The question you would ask around normal is, what do people like us do? If you were to take that same question and use the word normative, you would say more so, what supports healthy human growth and development? And we can look and see what is normative in a variety of different lines of development to answer that question. Okay, so sometimes also, just to keep this nice and interesting, something can be non-normal and in a given culture, but it can still be healthy, mature, ethical, or spiritually integrated. And so sometimes you may feel as if you are an outlier because everyone around you, or maybe it feels like everyone around you are not seeing you as normal, because what they're trying to do is get along inside of the collective, and that their culture has told them and dictated, this is what we do around here, and you're doing what's actually more normatively, developmentally healthy, but you're in the different direction. You're going against the flow of normal. This kind of touches into integral theory's concept of the center of gravity. In other words, every culture, and this can include any collective, that can be a family, a church, a society, whatever, they have their center of gravity where, and they want everybody to be there, right? They want, this is what the normal people do, is where we sit right here. If you're below it, you get tons of support. They really want to lift you up to their version of normal, whatever that culture or society or church is. Now, if you move beyond that, you move outside of normal, even though what you're doing may be very normatively healthy and adaptive for a psychologically advancing and developing human being. Okay. So we're talking here about sometimes we confuse the two, right? And we think, we look around and go, well, everybody's doing it. This must be not only normal, but sometimes we think, well, people wouldn't all be doing it if it wasn't the right thing, or if it wasn't a good thing, right? And so sometimes we have to, like, I'm trying to wrap words around this with you, which is to say, sometimes that which is normal is not normative in terms of healthy psychological flourishing. I'm not here to say that everything that you experience in your faith journey in or around the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is normative, right? Or normal, right? So this is messy. There are probably there's some healthy things that go on right there in your faith development inside of the church. And there are some normal but unhealthy things or non-normative things in the church. And the same goes for somebody on a faith journey. You can be moving out of Mormon norms and be developing in ways that are actually non-normative or not healthy on a faith journey. So one does not equate into the other. Okay, let's pivot just a little bit and talk a little bit about what happens when we are on a faith journey in the LDS church, and how much, I don't know, anxiety or pain or discomfort it causes when we move outside of the church's version of normal. This is not an LDS only phenomenon, but this does happen quite pervasively in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There is a very strong culture of normal in the church. I think I'm stating the obvious here, right? Normal in the LDS church is about conformity. Conform with what the church dictates as theologically sound and healthy according to its standards. And what that brings about is institutional stability. And so there's a very high price to pay for being non-normal in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that makes me sort of sad for you and for me and for our families, because what this does is it actually takes normal or normative growth and development, and it pathologizes it, and it makes us feel as if what we're doing is, sometimes we feel not only do we feel not normal, but we also feel like it's something that is very, it's lonely. We feel ostracized. We feel as if we are being pushed outside. And sometimes that is very, very sad and scary if it means that our normal growth and development costs us very important relationships and things that really matter to any and all human beings. So what makes something normal in the LDS church culture? I just have a few thoughts on this. I'm sure this is very non-conclusive, but normal, right? Like what we do around here in the LDS church, really, again, my opinion or what I've observed and lived myself is alignment with correlated doctrine and current leadership. That's normal. That's what one does if they want to go along to get along. If you want friends, if you want acceptance, if you want church callings, if you want status even. Other things that are normal in LDS church culture is markers of compliance, right? So temple worthiness, temple recommends, church callings, paying your tithing, honoring the word of wisdom. Some of these are internal things that we just personally do. Some of these things are markers of belonging that people know about, right? I would add to that, I didn't before, but the wearing of garments so that people can like notice by how you dress is a marker of normalcy for people that are highly compliant. inside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. More markers of being, normal, and on YouTube you can see me kind of doing the hand quote thing, is emotional regulation that supports certainty and harmony, and that you act accordingly. Those are ways of being human and in connection that give you a lot of social equity. If you know the church is true, and if you do whatever it takes to sort of keep the harmony going in the room, then you are considered normal, acceptable, desirable in the church. Also, testimony stability is considered very, very normal. You don't show up with doubt or questions or public ambivalence about anything. You certainly don't express the doubt in a current leader. That is considered outside of the range of normal. And that instability is threatening and is scary and is definitely pathologized. Also, something that is considered normal in the LDS Church is adherence to the definition of gender and family. Now, I want to throw a caveat on there and acknowledge how in my own life, I have noticed a beautiful trending towards the acceptance of LGBTQ plus people, even amongst family members that remain very devout and stalwart in the LDS Church. I lived through an era of time where it was not uncommon that Latter-day Saints would actually sort of kick their LGBTQ plus loved ones out or make them kind of go away. And I just don't see that anymore. So it's becoming more normal in a good way, right? Shout out to evolution of consciousness amongst families that are devout in the LDS Church, that they are holding more space for diversity amongst their own family members. Now, I think what they're actually doing in some ways is holding more complexity right there, because oftentimes they are sitting in the tension of theologically, our doctrine says this, but I have this child whom I love that is outside of the normal bounds of our, what the theology says is normal and acceptable. And I'm holding both, but at least they're holding both. So I'm going to give them credit for that. One other thing that I think is considered normal in devout LDS circles is deference to priesthood authority, certainly over non-priesthood or female authority, but also deference to external priesthood authority over personal authority. These are all things that are considered normal in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they function as boundary maintenance mechanisms, not as measures or metrics. There's no metric around health in any of these things. What these sort of normal parameters are that I just kind of walked you through answers the following questions. Do I, in this case, do I reinforce and stabilize the system, right? So if I am unconsciously even wanting to reinforce and stabilize the church, I am going to keep myself or my questions to myself. I'm going to honor or maintain gender and family roles. I'm going to defer to external authority. I'm going to downplay personal authority. I'm going to align with correlated doctrine and leadership. And I'm going to line up and be compliant to the markers of my worthiness or my belongingness through all of the things. And if we don't do these things, if we step outside of the range of what our culture says is normal, there are consequences. And there's even a narrative that's fairly consistent around what that means about us. When I was going through the conversations that I had with my stake leaders in 2025, really trying to help my stake president better understand my work, this was not said directly to me, but I was told later by a dear friend of mine and who was the Relief Society president in my ward and a fierce advocate for my work. He told her that I was being prideful. That's a very common a descriptor of somebody who is acting outside of the range of normal inside of a society that has fairly strict parameters of normal, which institutional patriarchies do. Also, if we act outside of the range of normal, sometimes people feel as if we are being deceived. I have not been directly, I'm trying to remember if this is actually true. I don't think I've ever been sort of called out as being deceived. But I dare say that's probably the narrative that lots of my loved ones who are devout believers think. They're kind of like, and again, this is certainly, at least in some way, shape, or form, my trying to like read one's mind, right? So take this for, with a pound of salt. But my suspicion sometimes is how these loved ones are navigating what Nathan and I are experiencing is, my goodness, they're such good people. They're so earnest. They seem smart. Man, they're deceived. They're really deceived. They've been really taken in. Other ways that people that step outside of normal are portrayed is as being dangerous, unfaithful, led astray, and we can't forget lazy, right? Which I find, the most comical of all, because there's one thing that those of us who are on a faith journey are not, and that is we are not lazy. Generally speaking, it is through our study and our deep dive into things of a spiritual nature that lead us to a faith journey because we're developmentally ready for one. So this is what happens when someone like you or me on a faith journey evolves and grows in ways that are developmentally right on track. We sometimes are seen as deviant, or certainly we're seen as abnormal because we develop differentiated beliefs. And that right there starts to be really, really scary. We also start to speak from our own lived experience rather than second or third hand claims of what is good, right, and true based on authority figures out there. And that's not to say that authority figures cannot be helpful in our growth and development. I am not anti-authority figures or outside authority. I read books by authorities all of the time, but then I check it against my internal compass, my inner divine. And then I discern what feels as if it resonates with the God that is within me. And so we come to find our voice. We come to be differentiated. We internalize who we are and why we're here and what we're doing. And we have the heightened capacity to hold paradox and ambiguity. And that is what feels frightening and abnormal in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you're thinking about measuring or looking at, observing how we on a faith journey are interacting with the world against sort of some of these parameters that are typically considered normal in the Mormon culture. Okay, just a couple more things I wanted to think about as we're sort of breaking this down. And I'm hoping you're feeling, not to use a pun here, but I'm feeling like normal in the best way, right? As I'm talking about this, that what you're experiencing is, to stay, true to my terms here, it's normative, or it's like healthy for you to become a more complex thinking, self-defining person as you spiritually grow and develop. And so this is what's sort of feels, at least in the very, very early faith journey, very, very confusing, because for so many of us, as we take our first step into what feels like the darkness of a faith journey, there's a good reason why we call it a crisis, because in some ways we have not been educated around how normal, like truly normal, not just normal according to our little culture, our society, but how truly common, I should say, it is for a human being to evolve and grow beyond some of the things that are considered very, very normal in Mormonism. In other words, some people will stay in that space their whole lives for their own good and valuable reasons. But for so many of us, and I think it's happening more so now than ever before, what's happening is actually becoming more and more common because we are, in fact, growing. So let's just talk a little bit about what is actually normative as one evolves and is actually, in fact, growing. And the reason why I want to like break this down a little bit is that for some of us, it's very reassuring to know that what is happening is not sinful, it's not evil, it's not wrong. And I want to talk to those of you out there, especially who feel like you have no one to talk to and who feel very, very frightened and lonely, that what's happening here in your faith, I don't even want to call it necessarily a deconstruction, because I don't think for some of us it feels like that, but at very least, you're starting to ask questions, you're starting to be more of a complex thinker. I'm here to say that from a normative perspective, from a psychologically informed perspective, what you're doing is typical and healthy for a growing human being. So when we are evolving and growing and we're in a process of developmental differentiation, these are some of the things that we can expect. These are common and they happen to people all of the time, okay? And first of all, cognitively, we move away from literal belief and we move towards metaphor or symbol. This can include much of what we learned literally from scripture. For low-hanging fruit here is, I remember not that long ago, it's been a few years, but not like years and years and years ago, that it occurred to me that the garden narrative was just that. It was a narrative. It wasn't literal. And so that is part of my cognitive growth and development. Something else cognitively that is very common to happen in developmental differentiation is I'm able to hold more ambiguity and paradox. Thank God for that, because a faith journey requires us to do a whole bunch of that. The only problem that we run into is oftentimes at the very beginning of our faith crisis or our faith journey, we don't have a huge capacity to hold ambiguity and paradox. And so our brain does start to feel like it's going to break a little bit. In other words, we have just a little skill set and we have to practice this and do more of it more often and normalize it before it starts to feel more normal. I'm saying normal a lot here, but something else I want to say is that my growth and processing groups are a beautiful, beautiful place. It's like the sandbox of normalizing what's really going on inside of us and recognizing that nothing's wrong here. It's all good, right? Something else that we're able to do that is very, very typical or common in developmental differentiation or normative is we are more and more able to integrate multiple perspectives. This is one of my favorite topics. The taking of more and more perspectives is the foundation of growth and development. It means we are more and more capable to love more and more things, to understand, to be curious about, to look at, and to appreciate different perspectives and recognize that I have something to learn from you and I don't need to be afraid of you. If we want to think about developmental differentiation and what is normative in psychological growth and development as part of the faith journey, let's look at what happens emotionally. Emotionally, we are able to have more tolerance for more kinds of emotions. When we are psychologically early in our development, we struggle oftentimes with sometimes we're very overregulated and sometimes we're very underregulated. And it kind of depends on our temperament, our environment, and a number of factors. But as we evolve emotionally in our lives, which oftentimes then bleeds into a faith journey, we are able to achieve more affect tolerance. We're able to sort of understand what we're thinking about. Why am I feeling this way? We can hold emotion. We can be sad and allow ourselves to work through it. We can feel joy and allow ourselves to metabolize that. We recognize that feelings crest and they crash, and we don't find ourselves either under-regulated or over-regulated. We also have an increased ability to feel more emotions on both sides of the spectrum and to sit with them and be present with them. We also find that our selfhood is not dictated by external validation. Now, if this is one's hard for you, then welcome to the human race. Like this is a tricky one. All of us want and appreciate validation. That is just part of what it means to be human. But one of the most important components of a really beautiful, progressive Latter-day Saint faith journey is it's mandatory that we live outside of external validation because we don't get much, especially some of us who have very devout friends and family and loved ones. We don't have people patting us on the back and being, proud of us. And for some of us, that's very, very painful, especially because those of you who listen to Latter-day Struggles were the most compliant, devout Latter-day Saints. It's why the faith journey is so painful. And it's also probably why you're as lonely as you are if you are struggling, because for the most part, your devoutness comes from having a community, partners, families, family of origins that also were and sometimes still are very, very devout. And these people, they're not in a position to validate you anymore. And so it's kind of a good thing that developmental differentiation, normative growth, is about learning how to live outside of external validation. Let's talk a little bit about what happens, what's normative or what's developmentally typical spiritually as you go on a faith journey is that if everything goes well, and I care tons about this in the work that I do, if you are going to deconstruct, it is followed by a reconstruction. Okay. So this is a big deal because in Mormonism, I think we struggle here. If we just deconstruct and sort of stay there in that spin, I maintain that that is not a progressive faith expansion experience. Just having a faith crisis or awakening to some of the problems of the church does not a faith journey make, or does not a successful faith journey make. In other words, spiritually, as we are evolving and becoming developmentally differentiated people, we move through our crisis into an expansion, and this must include transcendence and inclusion, or said differently, differentiation, but then integration. It's a recognition that we come by our ability to spiritually differentiate by our earlier worldviews and by the fact that we satisfied what needed to happen in our lives through what we learned and how we grew in our earlier stage faith itself. This is a tough one, and I dedicate all of my Friday content, or most of it, to elements of transcendence and inclusion, changing one's worldview, but holding on to the foundations of what makes us who we are, that gave us the capability to be able to transcend our worldview. So much more on that if you join the fellowship. Okay, some other components of healthy or normative developmental differentiation in one's life is authority moves from external to internal and then relational. We become very, very interpersonal. And I love that because it doesn't mean that we sort of move from just externalizing everything to sort of walling off and only regarding what's going on inside. That's going to be a closed loop. If all we do is think to ourselves, what do I think and what do I believe? We want to be collaborative and interactive. And so as we evolve and expand, we become very, very relational in nature, and we check in with our own internal North Star, our higher selves. But we also are created to be very, very relational. And faith becomes much more about embodied experiential connection with the divine than anything that is performative. That's the last tenet of what I kind of wanted to talk about as far as what's normative in spiritual growth and development. So as I kind of close this up, I just want you to sort of think about how you used to, or maybe you still are struggling a little bit with thinking that doubt or like the disorientation that you felt, the confusion that you felt as you started your faith crisis meant that this uncomfortable feeling inside meant something, like, and maybe you early on interpreted this as the Spirit telling you to like double back, stop doing this, right? I know that's what I was taught. And I certainly thought that. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this thing is happening to me that I've always been told to be afraid of. And I'm over here like recklessly letting it happen. And I had to sort of pause and go, wait a second. Maybe what I was told was wrong and scary and pathological is none of the above. Maybe what I was told was wrong. Maybe what I'm experiencing is actually not only right, but it's good and it's holy. And the reason why I was able to hold on to it is because I felt it. There was something deep in me that said, no, this is it. This is good. You haven't arrived. We'll probably never arrive, right? It's not about arriving. It's about the journey. But I felt very deeply with the whatever limited access I had of my internal higher self. Stay the course, Valerie. This is not bad. This is not wrong. Keep doing what you're doing. The thing is that if something inside of you like sort of hearkens to or listens and like really gets afraid and doubles back, or if you have a partner, or if the church treats these developmental milestones as sin or as failures, there are big consequences to our buying into those stories. It brings about lots and lots of anguish. Sort of sometimes we shut down. Sometimes we don't feel resourced enough to sort of stay the course. And if that's the case, I get it, because it's hard and it's lonely and it's terrifying. The reconstruction of one's own identity, especially in Mormonism, is grueling and excruciating. It's worth it, but at the very beginning, it's just sometimes it feels so scary. If we sort of keep pressing this down, this higher self, this evolution that wants to come forth, sometimes it actually brings about dissociation, scrupulosity, sometimes even mental health disorders, anxiety disorders, and depression, and things like that. And sometimes we live in such dissonance that it causes a great deal of emotional strife. And I get it. I don't want to minimize that for so many of us, the price that we pay to move beyond what is considered normal in the church is it's huge. And for some, it's even devastating. So I want to just go ahead and close today by offering to you that I share this with you today so that you can kind of wrap words around the difference between what is sometimes considered socially normal and what is normative in human growth and development. And sometimes they might line up, but sometimes they don't. And if you're on a faith journey, this is helpful information, right? This is really helpful information, because sometimes what the LDS Church calls normal is about maintaining institutional stability. And what psychology and spiritual formation calls normative is about healthy human development. And sometimes what creates institutional stability does not create human thriving. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And so it's really good to know the difference, or to be able to wrap language around what's culturally normal and what is normative from the perspective of psychological and spiritual thriving. And it is my hope that as we have more conversations like this, as we look at what does lead to a person's thriving, what does lead to a person's capacity to access the divine within them, that in some hopeful, aspirational future universe, our spiritual systems will catch up to us and want what is normatively and sort of like proven in social sciences and in the larger world. They'll want to collaborate and say, what we want is what is best for your soul. Where we are now is that what is normal, I do believe, is mistaken in some ways to be best for our souls, even sometimes when there are human beings that are very vigorously trying to communicate that what's happening within them as they tried to do normal wasn't working, and it was hurting their souls. And so we're not there yet. We're not there yet institutionally, but many of us are on faith expansion journeys. We are evolving and awakening, and we are trying to embody more and more love. We are becoming more conscious, which is just another way of saying that we are coming to realize that each and every one of us is an embodiment of God in human form. And that to outgrow certain things is actually exactly what we're here to do. The thing that I think is painful and causes so much tension is for so many of us, we're having to address the reality that everybody is in a different place on the faith journey. And so it becomes painful because our normative growth and development is not seen as normal. And sometimes it feels like the relational consequences are overwhelming. So I see you, I get it. I feel it firsthand, but I also want you to feel supported and appreciated and seen, that what you're doing is normative. Hurrah! Congratulations. You're trending really well if you're on a faith journey. Thank you so much for hanging out here with me. Thank you for supporting the Latter-day Struggles platform. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. If this podcast has supported your faith journey, we invite you to explore the many ways you can continue your healing and growth with us. On our website, you'll find support and processing groups, marriage and parenting courses, and free resources to support where you are in your faith journey. You can also join Valerie in the live fellowship gatherings throughout the year, where we connect, process the podcast, and build meaningful friendships with others on similar paths. If cost has ever been a barrier, we offer podcast scholarships funded by listener donations. To explore all of these offerings, visit the link in today's show notes or go to latterdaystruggles.com. And if this podcast has been meaningful to you, leaving a 5-star review is one of the most powerful ways to help others find this work. Latter-day Struggles is proud to be part of the Dialogue Podcast Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.